Hey everyone! Welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today I'm going to be talking about how change comes when you build up your personal skills. My guest this week is Eshan Vishwakarma, and he is the creator of the docu-series Outspoken Narrative. Eshan is working on creating documentaries about a variety of different topics, and he shared some of his current projects as well as plans for the future of Outspoken Narrative. I really learned a lot from this conversation, so without further ado, let's get started with this episode featuring Eshan Vishwakarma.
So basically, my name's Eshan. I'm based on the East Coast. And right now, one of my biggest projects, which has been going on for about a year, is my docuseries called The Outspoken Narrative. So I've been creating documentaries alongside a team of high school and college students from around the world. And we've been creating documentaries for over a year. And over the past season, we garnered over 170,000 views and major support from National Geographic photographers, Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, and international film competitions. And we have been able to have genuine, long lasting impacts on audiences in terms of educating them on a bunch of different topics. And more specifically, we're shifting to conservation and climate change topics. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing right now, and uh, I'm basically creating content for conservation awareness. So yeah.
That's a great start, and as a journalism student who has worked in video production and editing, I am super interested to learn more about the work you're doing because documentary production is so difficult. And I'd love for you to start off by giving me a little bit more about the work you're doing with Outspoken Narrative. And I'd just love to know more about the context, about how it was created, just more about the background of Outspoken Narrative. How did the docuseries get started? What inspired you to choose this medium?
Yeah, so basically what we wanted to do is that we knew that there was a burst of infographic content on Instagram in midst of 2020. And while infographics can be useful, they don't tell as much of a compelling narrative as what a film can tell and what a film can show. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to stand out, and that's why we chose to take on filmmaking. It wasn't necessarily climate change filmmaking or conservation filmmaking. Now we have narrowed down, and we're specifically focusing on nature filmmaking. But in season one, where we released 12 episodes, each around 10 minutes, we did a bunch of different topics. We did politics, we did pop culture, we did conservation, obviously, and we were experimenting around with what type of film really worked the best for us and was most accessible for viewers as well as us to produce. So what happened is that there was this really big breakthrough. I think it was in 2020. Yeah, somewhere around there was this location called the Arctic Refuge, which was at stake for oil drilling. So there was going to be a bid to open the Arctic Refuge for oil companies to go and start drilling and start endangering the population and native animals of that area. So what happened was that we found out about this issue and we made a documentary within the span of 2 weeks, really. And this documentary did really well. I think right now we are at like 50,000 views on a bunch of different platforms combined. We got 50,000 views, and we won a bunch of film competitions as well. And that's where we realized that conservation filmmaking and nature filmmaking, there's definitely a real necessity for content relating to the state of the world and climate change and a bunch of issues that the world faces. So it was a gradual, it definitely didn't come naturally. It took a long time to get where we are right now, but we learned and progressed, and now we have a team of around 25 kids from around the world. And yeah, we release a documentary every month. Alongside, we do collaborations with the best photographers around the world, and we release a short film every month as well. So a lot of content.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the project involved so many different forms of media, and that's so exciting that you've been able to develop it in that way because that's huge having so many different platforms. So, what would you say has been your favorite project to work on so far? Do any of them stand out to you as being particularly impactful or maybe especially important to you? Does anything like that come to mind for you?
I mentioned the Arctic Refuge one, and that was that the only reason that really stuck with me is because the situation was so dire, and it was so it was so time sensitive that it was amazing how quickly us, like we as a team, were able to pull it off. For context, making a 10-minute film in the span of like 2 weeks, with we interviewed a National Geographic, like award-winning National Geographic photographer who has operated in the Arctic Refuge for like the majority of his life, and like getting those things to align was incredible. We interviewed researchers in Alaska. We interviewed Native Americans based in Alaska, the Gwich'in population, which was an incredible, insightful interview. And it was that film that really showed me that there is a community in conservation unlike any other field. Like there's finding communities within politics is really challenging. We made a film on the Capitol riots and what happened when the Capitol was overthrown. It was a successful film. It just we didn't get the support or guidance that we wanted to create the film to its fullest capacity. But with the Arctic Refuge, we had so many sources, so many people willing to tell the story and share their perspective, and that was like a really key part that kind of decided of a future for us at the Outspoken Narrative, that we would do climate change filmmaking and nature filmmaking. Another like really core film that I really enjoyed was our first film of this next season, of this new season, season two. We released our first film about like 2 weeks ago, and that was the first film that we went in person after COVID restrictions had been lifted. We went in person and we shot locally in Richmond, and it was a film on environmental racism. And we everything was sourced through us. We had a original soundtrack. We had a drone pilot shoot drone footage for us. We had 3 interviews. We had like a whole bunch of things that came together for that, and it was like a 3-month project. So it was like the like my first experience like working on a long-term project, because usually we take 1 month to make the film, and this one was like a lot more intensive and a much larger project, but it really paid off. It really paid off. So those are like the two of my most favorite films.
I think that's a great point about how much work goes into making documentaries because I don't really think people realize how many hours of filming and editing go into making just 5 or 10 minutes of a video. So, thank you for sharing that. I have kind of a different question for you now. If you could go back in history and film any event at all, which would you go back to and why?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have to think a little bit, but I know it was actually quite recently, and I don't think I'd make a documentary on it, but I think just experiencing it, being there. I don't know if you've heard of it, but Darwin's Arch, it recently collapsed. Like I think it happened like a year ago. It's like a natural structure that it's like a really cool arc that like collapsed due to natural like occurrences. It was just being eroded over years. I think I saw it everywhere, and I felt so distant because I haven't, even though making documentaries on like the like nature and stuff like that, you don't, especially if you're in high school, especially if you're a student, you don't get to go out like and like experience the places that you want to experience and experience the places that you're making the documentaries on. But yeah, I would have definitely wanted to experience the arch before it collapsed. And because I know it was a really big deal when it happened. And there's also another thing. We made a documentary on the Fairy Creek blockade, which was a really big, it's ongoing right now, but it's a blockade in Vancouver, Canada, that's trying to preserve the last old growth trees of the area. So like they're the oldest trees in the world, really. And they're being threatened for logging, right? And this has been a historical issue because it happened once many years ago, and that was last time it happened. It was one of the largest civil disobedience acts in Canadian history. Like there were thousands of people who showed up to protest in Vancouver, Canada, against logging, and that would have been a really cool place to make a documentary. But yeah, the arts, I would definitely just go there to experience it. It was really a beautiful place.
That's really interesting and definitely not something I knew that much about, so thank you for sharing that. Switching gears a little bit, what is the best advice you've gotten from someone, or maybe are there any words of wisdom that you try to live by? Does anything like that come to mind for you?
I've heard a lot of advice going into like getting started into making the documentaries. I would look at a lot of YouTube videos. I tried to teach myself like how to run a organization and how to do it, especially with a creative organization, how to do like how to create well. And what I saw was that the tutorials really didn't help me. It was just the experience that helped me, like doing it hands on. But one of the best things I heard, it was actually from a YouTube video by Marcus Brownlee. He is a tech YouTuber. And he made a YouTube video about just his creative process and like how he creates. And one of the things he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but one of the things he said is that knowing that you have progressed is being able to look back at your past works and seeing how bad they were. Like if you can realize that you've grown, and if you can realize that you are a better creator by looking at your past works and being not ashamed by it, but like being kind of laughing at yourself. If you can do that, then clearly you've progressed. Like you're showing growth. You're becoming a better creator. You're becoming a better individual, and you're becoming a better storyteller. And I think that's really important because I sometimes, I mean, I think a lot of people do it, but sometimes I go way too hard on myself because why would I create that like horrible piece of content? But now the fact that I think it was bad has shown that I've become a better storyteller, and I had to go through that path. I had to create bad stuff to get progressively better. And by no means am I perfect right now. And probably like two years down the road, I'm gonna think that the documentaries I'm making right now could have been 10 times better. But it's definitely progress that you shouldn't be ashamed of.
That's great advice, and I think it's great inspiration to keep working and keep getting better. I think it ties in really well with the idea of only competing with yesterday's version of yourself because you're always just trying to improve your own skills and your own work. And I think that's so important to remember. So thank you for sharing that. I have one last question for you. Lots of young people, particularly college students, high school students, want to create change and they want to make a difference in the world, but they may not know how or maybe where to get started. Do you have any advice for those people who may be listening?
The best option is that you work on yourself and you get yourself to a place where you can contribute to a movement. In terms of creativity, you work on your skills, like creative skills, like filmmaking or painting or writing. Like you build up your personal skills and you get yourself to a place where you can genuinely contribute. I think especially in 2020, and after the events which happened, and like after the pandemic, everyone wanted to do something and everyone did stuff. It's just sometimes it wasn't the most effective because they didn't know what was needed, and usually they didn't have the skills to contribute genuinely to the causes that they wanted to. I even tried that, and I learned that if you don't have your basis, if you don't have your core values, if you don't have a good understanding of your abilities, you won't be able to help anyone else. And that's the best thing that any young person can do. Like build up your skills, build up your abilities through like experimenting and creating bad things and getting better as you go, and just constantly looking for new opportunities to talk to people as well. Like talking to people is a really strong way of learning. That's what I've learned through like interviewing a bunch of people through the documentaries. You learn so much by conversation. So definitely focusing on yourself and not worrying too much about giving back to the world. Because the more you focus on yourself, the rest will come eventually.
I have so much respect for the work Eshan's doing, and I'm so glad I got to bring him on the show to share about outspoken narrative. I want to quickly highlight Eshan's advice about working on your own personal skills because I really liked his explanation. I respect Eshan for talking about how important it is to focus on your own growth and working to be better than you were in the past. I love the idea about getting to the point where you can laugh at your own work from the past because you've progressed so well to get to the point where you're at now. Focus on your own personal growth and become the best version of yourself. Because, as Eshan explained, change comes when you build up your personal skills. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can connect with Eshan on Instagram at Eshan_Vishwakarma, and you can check out Outspoken Narrative at Outspoken_narrative on Instagram as well. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at bethechangepodcast. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.